Here are 10 fantasy books to read once that will stick with you forever. And the first one I would recommend is reading I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Now this novel is very short, and I think a lot of people will probably know it from the adaptation with Will Smith, but I read this novel early this year, and you can read it in less than a week, probably in one setting if you're a very fast reader, but it was so good, and it's definitely a classic for a reason. It basically follows this one man that's set in a post-apocalyptic setting where he is totally alone. He believes he's the only human left and there are zombies everywhere, or actually in the book it's actually vampires, but the vampires act like zombies, and that's why people usually say that he's the first one that even wrote zombies, which is really cool. But yeah, the theme of how do you keep going when there's nothing to live for, how do you deal with depression and the actions you make, and really what drives you to keep on breathing day after day after day when there is so little hope. And I was also surprised by how much ground is covered in such a short book. So yeah, it's not that often I promote classics on my channel because I generally read a lot of modern stuff, but yeah, I'm so glad I read I Am Legend. I would highly recommend it, and I think most of you will feel both emotionally impacted, which is one of the reasons why it will stick with you, but it will also give you lots of things to think about, which is the second reason why I think it will stick with you forever. Book number 2 is The Invisible Life of Ada LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Now, I read this book 4 years ago, and honestly, I still think about this book on a relatively frequent basis. Now, there's two reasons why this novel has really stuck with me. Firstly, this book follows two separate plot lines. One plot line that is set 300 years in the past, and then one plot line that is set in our present. And it is so well done. It's so interesting to see how these plot lines that are so far away from each other when you think about time-wise interact with each other. It is so well done. But very similarly to I Am Legend, V.E. Schwab, she analyzes the theme of what is the meaning of life and how do you keep going living when you can't really form meaningful relationships with other people. I think both I Am Legend and V.E. Schwab really emphasize the need for humans to have meaningful relationships with other people, and yeah, I think this novel is just brilliant, and it's also a standalone. Book number 3 is a book I finished around 2 weeks ago, and the reason why it's on this list is not because it's the best book by this author, but because there is one scene in this novel that is so incredible, and I won't spoil anything, but that's gonna be Needful Things by Stephen King. Now, this is a 930 book chunker, it's a standalone, and it's honestly maybe the most underrated Stephen King novel I have ever read. It's basically about Castle Rock, this small town where a mysterious figure, he comes to the village and he opens his shop. Now, people can go into the shop, and usually this mysterious figure, he will give them whatever their hearts desire, but it comes at a great cost. And oh man, this novel was so riveting. Stephen King, he does incredible coming of age as always. He just knows how to write small town America, and I just loved how the themes are so nuanced. We had a book club discussion for my page for this novel, and we were discussing like what was the primary theme in this novel, and it can actually be quite hard to dissect, but there's definitely some criticism of materialism, and again, similar to the first two novels, there's a big emphasis on what is important in life. Is it material goods, or is it relationships with other people, for example? But there's so much to this novel. As I said, it's around 930 pages, and yeah, I loved everything about it. Now, does hearing about all of these books make you feel like there's just too many exciting books to read? Do you wish you could read them all faster than you do? Well, there may be a way, which leads me to today's sponsor, Skillshare. Now, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes and members, and it's truly a place to get inspired, learn new skills, and put them to work in impactful ways. What really makes Skillshare unique is the fact that it has the largest online learning community for creatives with a massive depth and breadth, covering topics such as illustration, graphic design, marketing, and it also has creative career focused classes which can help you in marketing, freelancing, or social media, and so much more. And it has a learn by doing approach to teaching, which I love. One class that has helped me understand the basics of speed reading was the Speed Reading Mastery W Reading Speed in 7 Days course by Jordan Harry. Now, this course only takes around 4 hours to complete, and it really gave me some great insights on how I could implement some really simple things into how I read to read faster and better, so I would highly recommend it. So if you want to read loads this summer, check out Skillshare. Now, there's a link in the description down below where the first 500 people that use the link will get 1 month free of Skillshare, so please go and check it out. The fourth book that will stick with you forever, and I'll just add a tiny caveat here, I think this will be even more impactful if you're religious or if you are a Christian, which I am. And I had to add The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, the most famous novel set in the Narnia universe. Now, I read this novel as an adult, and I wouldn't say that it blew my mind by any means. It's written for children, the world building and the dialogue and everything is quite simplistic, but having grown up as a Christian and having gone to church and read the Bible like 3-4 times, it was so interesting to see a fantasy novel that has so many allegories all the way through. Now, some people don't even know that Narnia is a Christian fantasy, but yeah, if you know anything about the story of Jesus and then you read The Lion, the Witch and Wardrobe, you can just see that there are a huge amount of parallels there. Now, the fifth fantasy novel that'll probably stick with you forever, and I don't think this is gonna come to anyone's surprise, but that's gonna be The Sword of Kagan by Emma Wong. Now, this is arguably the best fantasy standalone I have ever read. The plot itself is compelling, but the analysis of grief and loss is just, it's gonna break your heart. But if you have lost someone in your life, I think you're gonna have a huge respect for how masterfully Emma Wong is able to analyze this theme of loss and grief in this novel. And one thing that is so unique about this novel, which is very different from most novels, is that we actually kind of have the primary climax of this novel at the halfway point, and then the second act of this novel places a big emphasis on analyzing grief, depression, loss, and so on. Also, the world building is very, very unique. It's kind of like this urban, futuristic kind of setting, but then it also feels like we're set like 200 years in the past. It's very, very unique. But yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. You should definitely check out this novel. Now, the sixth fantasy book I would recommend that will probably stick with you forever, I think at least that's the case for me, is gonna be Babel by R.F. Kuang. Now, how often have you read a novel that is set in a real setting, so Oxford, that analyzes and criticizes translation, colonialism, and also analyzes themes such as identity in a big way? This novel is so unique, but I found it incredibly compelling. Now, this is kind of a dark academia novel where there's a lot of focus on translation, but I found it so interesting how R.F. Kuang is able to analyze such a unique theme in a historical slash fantasy setting. Now, I'm not gonna say much more about this novel, but yeah, if you want to read a unique historical fantasy that has some really interesting themes, great characters, and also, again, is a standalone, I can't recommend R.F. Kuang's Babel enough. And the next one is, and if you watch my channel, this will not be a surprise by any means, but that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This tiny 220-page fantasy standalone is honestly one of the most compelling reads I've ever read. It's basically about this weird character that is lost in this massive mansion that is just filled with statues everywhere, and then we do have another character that pops up every once in a while, and we just follow this character as he walks through the mansion and tries to kind of piece together what is happening. And yes, this novel is very, very strange, but I think Susanna Clarke, she's really been able to craft a very compelling setting, a very compelling character, and then the themes are, again, I don't even want to mention which themes she analyzes, because I think that's actually one of the best things about this novel, is to know as little as you can about Piranesi before you pick it up. Now, the ending is very, very interesting, and I think a lot of people are not able to actually predict the ending because it's that unique. But from most people I've talked about, and myself included, I think the ending is brilliant. It is so fascinating, and I read this with my wife and we had some really, really great discussions. So I actually also encourage you to, if you have a friend or a spouse or whatever, read this novel together. It's short and it is just so good. It'll definitely hook you and make you read all the way to the end. Okay, and the next one, and obviously I had to mention Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. Now, I actually recently made a full interview with Philip Chase about why is the Lord of the Rings so good 75 years after it was written. And if you want to hear a professor talk about why the Lord of the Rings keeps speaking to us again and again in 2024, then just check out that video. But what I'll just say briefly is that Tolkien is not only arguably the most influential author of fantasy ever, but the Lord of the Rings trilogy incorporates so many themes that really resonates with readers. But I'll just recommend checking out that interview, because I can't even summarize why you should read Lord of the Rings in just like 30 seconds or so. Okay, on spot number 9, and obviously I had to include Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Now, if you don't enjoy crying, then maybe you shouldn't pick up this novel, but this novel is so incredibly sad but compelling. We basically follow this young bastard that has a major identity crisis, and he goes through so many horrible things. I genuinely think that Robin Hobb, she probably gets a kick out of torturing this character called Fitz. But yeah, this is a single POV kind of story. So we follow this young character called Fitz as he grows up in this big castle, but he's a bastard, so he doesn't really have a place in this world. And I've now read, I think, 12 or 13 books by Robin Hobb. There are very, very few authors out there that both have as beautiful writing as she does, but are also able to understand how humans work. All of the characters in the Realm of the Elderlings, and this is the Farsi trilogy, the first book in the Realm of the Elderlings, I would recommend starting here. The characters just feel so real and realistic, that's the thing, and they're so compelling. And themes of identity and finding finding your place in the world are so prevalent here. And we also have some incredible pet animal companions, so that's also a reason why you should read this. But yeah, as I said, it's not a light read, it'll definitely make you cry, but it is incredibly compelling. And yeah, Robin Hobb, I know she's talked about relatively a lot on book 2, but I still find that her novels are criminally underrated. Like, in my opinion, she should be up there with like George R. R. Martin and Joe Abercrombie and Brandon Sanderson. And the last book on this list, and this is book 2 in a series. Now, I really tried hard when I made this list to only include like the first book in a series or a standalone, but this novel is genuinely so fantastic that I still had to include it, because in my opinion it will stick with me forever, and I think most readers that read this, they will never forget the reading experience. And that's gonna be The Wall of Storms by Ken Liu, this 1000-page chunker. Now, The Grace of Kings, the first book in the Daniel Dynasty, you have to read that first. It's genuinely incredible as well. But what is so incredible with this novel is that if you read The Grace of Kings, you can have some criticism about like the characters aren't fleshed out as much, but here the characters are fleshed out so much more. But what Ken Liu just does so well in this novel is the analysis of so many themes. For example, the impact of technology on a society, the struggles of building a peaceful society, the importance of having values and religion, the importance of food, identity, the burden of bearing a legacy. There's so many incredible themes, and the world building here is genuinely some of the most exciting world building you can ever come across in the genre. And I'll just say it now, The Wall of Storms is genuinely one of the best books I have ever read. So I'll just say, The Grace of Kings, it might not be the book that everyone will love just because of how it's written, but in book 2 and onwards the series becomes much more character driven, and yeah, this novel is just a masterpiece. But I've actually made a full review that delves more into what the series is about, and it's totally spoiler free, so feel free to go and check that out. So those are the 10 fantasy books to read once that will stick with you forever. Which books would you have included on this list? You're still here and you want more? Well, the good news is that if you want more and you want to support me, then I do have a Patreon. Now, if you didn't know, then I have a Viking book club where every single month we read one book together, and you can be the one that can put the book forward. Last month we read this book, and this month we're reading this book. And at the moment we are trialing having Zoom book club discussions after everyone has read the book. So also, if you want to discuss a book with me and other like-minded people, then the Patreon is the way to go. Now, in addition to getting your name in my videos, joining the Viking book club, potentially getting art cards depending on what tier you are, I am also basically spending around 100% of my Patreon income to reinvest back into my channel. Since I launched my Patreon, I have had more than 30 videos professionally edited. And just to give an example, from September 2023 to March 2024, I have spent more than $1,500 into video editing with the aim to consistently post high quality videos for you to enjoy. It is much appreciated.